Did you know that just a 2-degree rise in global temperature can turn a lush rainforest into a desolate, dry woodlands? Group 4 is here to show you how our climate and our world's biomes are hanging by a thread.
Good day everyone, I am Camille Cardana and we will be discussing the climate and the world's biomes. Our objectives are to understand the difference between weather and climate, including the main climate zones and biomes, terrestrial and aquatic, to identify the factors that affect climate and the effects of climate change on ecosystems. Last is to learn how line transect and quadrat sampling are used to study organisms. Before we start discussing the topic, let me first show you the outline of our presentation. Our report is divided into several parts. First, we will discuss the world's climate, which includes the meaning of climate, the difference between weather and climate, the importance of climate, climate factors, climate zones, and climate change. Then, we will move to aquatic ecosystems, ocean biomes, and terrestrial biomes, and finally, the method used in ecological studies such as line transect and quadrat sampling. Let us begin with the world's climate. Climate is a very important concept in ecology because it affects where organisms live, how ecosystems functions, and how biomes are formed. Different parts of the earth have different climates, and those differences influence the types of plants, animals, and environments that can survive on those areas. For example, places with hot and wet climates like tropical regions usually have rainforests and very high biodiversity. On the other hand, areas with very dry climates, such as deserts, only support organisms that are adapted to limited water. So, in simple terms, climates help determine what kind of ecosystem or biome can exist in a certain place on Earth. Um, for example, the Amazon rainforest has a warm and humid climate, which allows many plants, insects, birds, mammals to thrive. Another example would be the Sahara Desert, where the climate is extremely hot and dry, so only specially adapted organisms like camels, reptiles, and desert plants can survive. Now let us define climate. Climate refers to the long-term pattern of weather conditions in a specific area. These conditions include temperature, precipitation, wind, and humidity, and they are usually observed over a long period of time, typically 30 years or more. This means that climate does not describe what is happening in just one day or one week, but rather the average weather conditions in a place over many years. Climate is influenced by several major components of the Earth system, and the first component is the atmosphere, which is the layer of gases surrounding the Earth. The atmosphere controls the movement of air, temperature changes, and weather patterns. It is also the most variable part of the ecosystem because its composition and movement can change due to both natural processes and human activities. For example, greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide in the atmosphere can trap heat and contribute to global warming. The second component is the hydrosphere, which includes all water on Earth such as oceans, rivers, lakes, groundwaters, and even water vapor in the atmosphere. Water plays a major role in regulating climate because it can absorb, store, and transport heat around the planet. For instance, oceans absorb heat from the sun during the day and releases it slowly, which helps regulate the temperature in coastal areas. The third component is the cryosphere, which refers to all frozen water on Earth, such as glaciers, sea ice, and snow. The cryosphere affects climate by reflecting sunlight back into space, which helps keep the planet cooler. For example, is the large ice sheets in Antarctica that helps reflect sunlight and helping regulate the Earth's temperature. Another component is topography, which refers to the physical features of the Earth's surface, such as mountains and valleys. Topography affects temperatures, rainfall patterns, and wind movement. Generally, places at higher elevations experience lower temperature. For example, is the mountain areas like Baguio in the Philippines are cooler compared to lowland cities such as Manila. The last component is the biosphere, which includes all living organisms such as plants, animals, and microorganisms. Living organisms can also influence climate through processes like photosynthesis and respiration. For example, forests absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, which helps reduce the greenhouse effect and regulate the climate. Now let us differentiate weather and climate, which are often confused with each other. Weather refers to the condition of the Earth's atmosphere at a particular time and place. It describes short-term changes in the atmosphere, such as rain, sunshine, wind, or storms. Because of this, weather can change very quickly, sometimes even within a few hours. For example, today it might be sunny in the morning but rainy in the afternoon. That change is considered weather. On the other hand, climate describes the average weather conditions in a specific region over a long period of time, usually 30 years or more. In other words, climate tells us what kind of weather we usually expect in a certain place. For instance, here in the Philippines generally has a tropical climate, meaning it is usually warm and humid throughout the year. Meanwhile, countries like Canada, for example, have a colder climate with snowy winters. So to summarize, weather is what is happening today or this week. On the other hand naman, climate is the long-term pattern of weather in a place. Okay, importance of climate. Understanding climate is very important because it helps us predict environmental conditions and prepare for future changes. Climate information allows scientists to study patterns such as rainfall, temperature changes, and rising sea levels. For example, by studying climate patterns, scientists can predict how much rainfall might occur during the rainy season, which can help the farmers decide when to plant their crops. Another example is predicting sea level rise due to warming ocean temperatures, which helps coastal communities prepare for flooding. Climate studies also helps us identify which areas are most vulnerable to extreme weather events, such as typhoons, droughts, or heat waves. In addition, understanding climate helps scientists determine which species may be threatened by climate change, allowing governments and organizations to create strategies to protect ecosystems and biodiversity. So overall, climate plays a very important role in shaping ecosystems and influencing life on Earth. Now that we understand what climate is and why it is important, the next presenter will now discuss the different factors that affect climate.
Good morning, I am Altea Sebron and I will be tackling climate factors or factors that can affect the climate of one's place. Climate is influenced by several factors. It can be global or local factors. Kapag sinabi natin global, ito yung factors na nakakaapekto sa buong mundo or sa pangmalawakang lugar. Kapag naman sinabi natin local, ang factors na ito ay nakakaapekto sa isang place lamang or basta sa smaller areas. So, there are three global factors. Ang una ay ang winds and air masses. So, importante ang wind or air dahil nakakatulong sila para mag-move ng heat and moisture around the earth. Kapag wala sila, nakakaranas ang isang lugar ng extreme weather or climate, kagaya nga ng sobrang init or sobrang lamig. Ang air masses naman, on the other hand, ay large bodies of air na iisa lamang ang temperature. Connected ang wind and air masses because the air mass carry the weather while wind creates or moves it. So, paano nga ba nakakaapekto ang wind and air masses sa klima ng mundo? So, they distribute heat from hot equator to cold poles. Ang winds and air masses ang nagtatransport ng heat and moisture na nagpapabagos sa climate ng isang lugar. So, sa picture, makikita natin ang movement ng air sa iba't ibang places ng mundo. So, pangalawa sa nakakaapekto sa klima ng buong mundo ay ang latitude. So, it describes how far north or south a place is from the equator. The places closest to the equator receive more direct energy from the sun than those farther from the equator. So sinasabi lang dito na kapag mas malapit ang isang lugar sa equator, ay mas nakaka-receive sila ng mas direct na sunlight. Ibig sabihin, mas mainit ang lugar doon. And kapag naman mas malayo ka sa equator, or mas malayo ang isang lugar sa equator, ibig sabihin na mas malamig ang lugar na iyon. So generally, lower latitude results to hot climate and higher latitude results to lower climate. Kagaya na nga sa Pilipinas, we are near the equator, that's why ang ating climate ay warmer kaysa sa ibang lugar. So, pangatlong factors na nakaka-apekto sa klima ng buong mundo ay ang ocean current. So, ocean current is a flow of water within an ocean influenced by winds, gravity, and the spinning of Earth on its axis. Basically, it is a large movement of water, and ito rin yung nagtatransfer ng heat around the planet na nagsistabilize ng temperature and nagkocontrol ng weather patterns. So, paano ito nangyayari? It moves warm water from the equator toward the poles and bring the cold water back towards the equator that influence the air temperature of nearby land. So kapag warm current, warm din ang climate. Kapag cool current, cooler din yung climate. Ang good example nito ay ang Gulf of Stream, which is from the Gulf of Mexico, and meron din siyang warm current. It carries warm water papuntang Atlantic Ocean toward Europe. Yung warm water na yon ay nagre-release ng heat, kaya much warmer ang climate sa Western Europe like France or Norway, kahit located ito sa mas mataas na latitude. So, tapos na tayo sa global factors and dadako naman tayo sa local climate factors. So, gaya nga ng sinabi ko kanina, kapag sinabi nating local, ito yung factors na nakaka-apekto lamang sa smaller areas, kagaya na nga sa Lukban. Meron tayong klima na pang sa atin lang. So, meron tayong tatlong climate factors or local climate factors. Ang una ay yung elevation. So, elevation ay ang taas ng isang lugar above sea level. So, habang tumataas ang elevation, mas lumalamig ang panahon. Ang good example nito ay ang ating lugar dito sa Lukban. We are about 1,300 to 1,700 feet above sea level, kaya malamig ang ating panahon. So sa Maynila naman, mas mainit ang panahon doon dahil sila ay nasa 0 to 5 above sea level. So just to conclude, mas mataas na elevation, mas malamig ang lugar. So next factor is yung relief. So, geographers use the term relief to describe the difference in height between the highest point and lowest point in an area. Differences in land height can affect the temperature, wind, and rainfall of a place. A simple way to understand this is through mountains. Kapag ang moist air galing sa ocean ay pumunta toward a mountain, binablock ng mountain ang air and pina-force niya ito para tumaas. Habang papataas ang hangin, lumalamig ito at nagpo-form ng clouds, which causes rain on that side of the mountain. Pagkalagpas ng hangin sa mountain, bababa naman ito and it will become warmer, so mas less ang rainfall on the other side. Good example is the Sierra Madre. Kapag may bagyo, ang hangin ay galing sa Pacific Ocean. The eastern part, which is sa kanan ng Sierra Madre, ang haharap sa wind, kaya on that eastern side, mas malakas ang ulan. While kapag nag-descend slowly ang wind sa western side or sa kanan, it creates drier climate. So sa madaling salita, ang relief ang nagsaseparate from wet and dry areas dahil sa mountains and land elevation that can block winds and change rainfall patterns. Next factor is a bodies of water. So bodies of water such as lakes and oceans affect the temperature and the levels of precipitation on nearby land. Water heats and cools more slowly than land, which helps stabilize temperatures in coastal regions. So basically, nag-act sila as a giant thermos. kasi water heats up and cools down ng mas mabagal kaysa sa land. Nakakatulong sila sa pagkontrol ng temperature ng isang lugar. Kapag ang isang lugar ay mas malapit sa body of water, mas moderate ang weather na nararanasan doon, compare sa lugar na mas malayo sa tubig. So, sa madaling salita, ang mga coastal areas ay nakakaranas ng cooler summer and warmer winter. Basically, moderate yung kanilang climate. Compared sa mga inland areas or areas na malayo sa bodies of water, dahil nga mas mabilis uminit sa land kaysa sa lugar na mas malapit sa bodies of water. So just to recap, makikita natin sa picture ang iba't ibang climate factors. So pag sinabi nga natin wind and air masses, sila ang nagtatransport ng heat and moisture na nagpapabago sa climate ng isang lugar. Kapag naman sinabi natin ocean current, ito yung nag-move ng warm water from the equator toward the poles and bring the cold water back towards the equator that influence the air temperature of nearby land. Kapag naman sinabi nating latitude, nakabase siya kung gaano kakalapit sa equator. So basically, pag mas malapit sa equator, mas mainit, and kapag mas malayo, mas malamig. Kapag naman elevation, ito ay basta yung measure above sea level. Kapag mas mataas ka above sea level, mas malamig ang nararanasan mong climate. So, sa relief naman, ito yung nagsiseparate sa wet and dry areas. And lastly, kapag bodies of water, ito yung nakakapag-control ng temperature ng isang lugar. Kapag mas malapit sa water, mas moderate ang temperature. And kapag mas malayo naman sa water or bodies of water, ay mas nakakaranas ng extreme weather or extreme climate. So, dadako na tayo sa next topic, which is the climate zones. So, there are 5 climate zones. And una na nga sa listahan natin is the tropical climate. So, pag sinabi nating tropical, it is a type of climate na matatagpuan malapit sa equator. So, sinabi ko nga kanina na kapag malapit sa equator ang isang lugar, mas mainit ang klima na nararanasan doon. So, basically, ang tropical, mas warmer ang kanyang climate. Ang isa pang characteristic ng tropical is hindi siya nakakaranas ng winter or ng snow. And mas nararanasan niya din ang mas madaming rainfall kaysa sa ibang lugar. Ang good example nito is sa Pilipinas. Nakakaranas tayo, di ba, ng mas maraming rainfall, and mostly ang weather natin or ang klima natin ay warmer kaysa sa ibang lugar. Ang next climate natin ay ang dry. So, ito ay located rin near the equator. And sila yung lugar na hindi masyadong nakaka-receive ng rainfall or basta madalang lang umulan sa lugar na ito. Hindi rin sila nakakaranas ng snow throughout the year dahil mas mataas ang evaporating level rito. Meaning, mas dry ang lugar na may ganitong klima. Ang basic example nito is yung mga desert, and specifically yung Sahara Desert. Mapapansin natin na ang mga ganitong lugar ay mainit lamang and madalang na silang maka-experience ng rainfall. Ang next climate natin is the temperate. So, meron lang itong moderate na klima. Meaning, it is neither too hot or too cold. Matatagpuin ito sa pagitan ng tropical and polar regions of the Earth. Nararanasan nila ang lahat ng seasons, which is spring, summer, autumn, and winter. Ang best example nito is sa Korea, sa Japan, and sa China. So, kung mapapansin natin sa kanila, nararanasan nila lahat ng seasons. So, next naman natin is the continental climate. Ang mga lugar na ito ay matatagpuan sa inland and far from oceans. So, dahil nga malayo sila sa oceans, ang lugar na ito ay hindi nagiging moderate ang kanilang klima. Kaya ang mga nararanasan nila ay mga extreme climates. Meaning, nakakaranas sila ng super hot summers and very cold and snowy winter naman. Ang best example nito is sa mga malalaking continents like North America, specifically sa Chicago, ganun ang kanilang klima. So next is the polar. It is located at the very top and the very bottom of the planet, which is the north and south poles. It is called the coldest climate on Earth dahil ang paligid nito ay nabubuo ng yelo or permafrost na hindi natutunaw sa buong taon. So, there are types of polar climate. Meron 3. And ang una sa listahan is the polar tundra. Ito ay ang polar climate na mas warmer, which is warm enough para ma-melt ang top layer ng snow na nag-aalaw para mag-grow ang some flowers and mosses. And next naman is the alpine tundra. Ito ay matatagpuan at high altitudes at any latitude, meaning hindi lamang ito matatagpuan sa North or South Pole, kundi sa iba ring parte ng mundo na nasa mataas na lugar or so far above sea level. Sabi ko nga kanina, sa factors that affect climate, habang tumataas above sea level, ang isang lugar ay lumalamig dito. Ang example nito ay ang Mount Everest. Ang next naman is the ice caps. So, this is the coldest of the cold. They are covered by a permanent layer ng snow and walang plants ang mag-grow sa lugar na ito. Example place nito ay ang Antarctica, which is covered by a thick sheets of ice. So, ang next topic na natin is the climate change. Puntakan na naman ng Group 1 ang topic na to, pero connected rin siya sa topic namin dahil this talks about the climate of the world. So, climate change is a long-term heating of Earth's climate system. It can be natural, like changes in the sun's activity. Pero since 1800s or simula ng paglagaw ng industrialisasyon, mas nagiging dahilan ng climate change ang mga human activities, kagaya na nga ng burning of fossil fuels na kailangan para mag-generate ang electricity. Ang isa pa is ang malawakang deforestation dahil ang pagkawala ng puno ay pagkabawas ng kapasidad ng ating planeta na maka-absorb ng carbon dioxide gases na nare-release ng pagsunog ng mga fossil fuels. Ang mga aktibidad na ito ay nagre-release ng greenhouse gases na nagtatrap ng heat sa ating atmosphere, kaya umiinit ang ating lugar. Sabi ng mga scientists na ang temperature ng Earth ay 1.42 degrees Celsius warmer kesa noong 1800s. So ano nga ba ang impacts ng climate change? Maraming nagiging epekto ang climate change sa klima ng ating mundo, kagaya na nga ng pagkaranas ng matinding klima na makikita sa ibang lugar na sinasabing mas mababa, mas mahaba at mainit ang summer kaysa noon. Mas malakas din ang nararanasang bagyo sa iba't ibang lugar dahil ang sobrang init ay nagiging dahilan ng pagkakaroon ng mas mataas na evaporation na makakabuo ng mas malaking cloud storm na magiging sanhi ng mas malakas na bagyo. Maaari ring maging epekto ng pagkawala ng mga species dahil hindi naman nila kayang mag-adapt agad sa mabilis na pagbabago ng klima ng mundo o pagtaas ng temperature dito. Ang isa pa ay ang pagtaas ng level ng tubig dahil sa pagkatunaw ng mga yelo na maaaring maging sanhi ng matinding pagbaha at paglubog ng ibang lugar sa mundo. Marami pang nagiging epekto ang climate change at iilan lamang ito sa maraming epekto. So, paano nga ba natin mamimitigate and maa-adapt yung mga kailangan natin gawin? Ang ilan sa mga kailangan natin gawin ay to switch to renewables kagaya ng paggamit ng solar power or wind power para makakuha ng electricity. At ang pinakasimpleng pwedeng gawin ng isang individual ay ang pagpoprotekta sa mga puno at pwede ring pagtatanim ng mga ito dahil sila ang nagsisilbing carbon sinks o mga nag-absorb ng carbon dioxide gases na makakasama sa ating mundo.
So, good day everyone. I am Julian Canemo and now let's discuss our next subtopic, which is aquatic ecosystem line transect sampling. So, bago natin i-discuss ang line transect sampling, let's talk about ano nga ba ang mga type ng aquatic areas kung saan pwedeng gamitin ang method na ito. So, ang aquatic ecosystems ay tumutukoy sa mga ecosystems na matatagpuan sa tubig kung saan nag-i-interact ang iba't ibang organisms tulad ng plants, animals, at microorganism. Isa ito sa pinakamalaking biome sa Earth dahil halos 75% ng surface ng ating planeta ay covered ng water. So, ang aquatic biome ay hinahati sa dalawang pangunahing uri. Ito ay ang freshwater at marine ecosystems. So, unahin natin ang freshwater ecosystem. So, ang freshwater ecosystem ay mayroong mababang salt concentration, usually less than 1% lamang. Kasama dito ang iba't ibang habitats tulad ng lakes, ponds, rivers, streams at wetlands. Ang freshwater habitats ay mayroon ding pwede rin siyang maklasify sa dalawang uri. Una ay ang lotic. Ito ay tumutukoy sa moving water o tuloy-tuloy na daloy ng tubig. At ang pangalawa naman ay ang lentic. Ito ay tumutukoy sa standing or still water kung saan hindi halos gumagalaw ang tubig. So, now let's talk about the ponds and lakes na isa sa mga example ng freshwater ecosystem. Sila ay makaklasify natin as lentic dahil sila ay hindi gumagalaw. So, ang ponds at lakes ay hinahati sa iba't ibang zone. Ito ay nakadepende sa lalim ng tubig at sa dami ng liwanag na nakakarating. So, ang una ay ang littoral zone. Ito ang pinakamalapit sa shoreline at mababaw na bahagi ng lake o pond. Dahil maraming nakakarating na sunlight dito, mas maraming aquatic plants at organism ang nabubuhay. So, ang pangalawa naman ay ang limnetic. Ito ay ang open water area malapit sa surface, ngunit malayo sa shoreline. Karaniwan dito matatagpuan ang mga phytoplankton at iba't iba pang uri ng isda. So, ang panghuli at ang pangatlo naman ay ang profundal zone. Ito ang pinakamalalim na bahagi ng lake o pond dahil kaunti o halos walang sunlight na dumadating dito or nakakarating dito. Maunti rin yung organism na nabubuhay sa zone na ito. So, now, let's move on sa next example. Yung streams at rivers. Ito ay makaklasify natin as lotic dahil ang streams at river ay isa sa mga flowing bodies of fresh water na may tuloy-tuloy na tubig. May tuloy-tuloy na daloy ng tubig mula sa kanilang sources tulad ng springs, snowmelt o lakes hanggang sa kanilang dulo. So, habang dumadaloy ang tubig mula sa sources papunta sa dulo ng river, nagbabago rin ang environmental condition tulad ng temperature, nutrients at organism na matatagpuan dito. So, ang sunod naman is ang wetlands. Ito ay ang mga lugar na may standing o mabagal na tubig at maraming aquatic plants. So, kabilang dito ang mga marshes, swamps, at iba pang saturated areas. Dahil sa ganitong kondisyon, nagiging tahanan ito ng maraming organisms tulad ng mga amphibians, insects, at iba't iba pang aquatic plants. Ang wetlands ay mahalaga rin dahil tumutulong ito sa pag-filter ng tubig at pag-support ng biodiversity. So now, let's move on. Cut nyo. So now, let's move on to our next type of aquatic ecosystem, which is marine ecosystem. So, ito ay mga aquatic habitats na mayroong mataas na salt concentration, opposite ng freshwater ecosystem na mayroong mababa. Ang halimbawa nito ay mga seas, coral reefs, at oceans. Ang marine ecosystem ay hinahati sa 5 ocean zones. Ito ay nakadepende din sa lalim at dami ng liwanag na nakakarating dito. Ang una ay ang sunlight o epipelagic zone kung saan maraming sunlight kaya maraming organism ang nabubuhay dito. Ang pangalawang zone naman ay ang twilight zone o mesopelagic zone kung saan mas kaunti ang liwanag na nakakarating dito kumpara sa sunlight zone. Ang pangatlo ay ang midnight o bathypelagic zone kung saan halos wala ng liwanag at madilim na ang environment dito. Sunod naman ay ang Baisal Zone o Abyssopelagic Zone na matatagpuan malapit sa seafloor at sobrang dilim at mayroon na ring mataas na pressure. At ang pinakahuli ay ang Hadal Zone na matatagpuan na yung mga deep trenches na at dito ang pinakamalalim na bahagi ng karagatan. So dito sa next slide makikita natin dito yung picture. Ito yung iba't ibang zone na hinahati base sa lalim at tamin ng liwanag na nakakarating. So, yung una is yung sunlight zone, twilight zone, midnight zone, the abyss, and yung trench na pinakamalalim na bahagi ng dagat. So, makikita natin sa diagram na habang lumalalim yung tubig, mas nababawasan ang liwanag at mas nagiging extreme ang conditions ng environment kaya mas paunti ng paunti yung organisms na nabubuhay dito. So in summary, may dalawa tayong pangunahing aquatic ecosystem. Yun nga yung freshwater at marine ecosystem. So, itong iba't ibang aquatic environments na ito, ang mga lugar kung saan maaari natin gamitin yung line transect sampling upang mapag-aralan ang distribution ng mga organisms sa isang habitat.
Magandang araw po sa ating lahat. Ako po si Jester Lim and i-discuss naman po natin ang tungkol sa line transect sampling. So, ano nga po ba ang line transect sampling? So, ang line transect sampling ay ginagamit na sampling method kung saan naglalagay tayo ng isang straight na line na kadalasan ay measuring tape sa isang particular na habitat or environment. Ginagamit ang linyong ito upang magsilbing guide upang ma-observe at maitala natin ang mga bawat organisms na matatagpuan sa nasasakupan nito. Ano nga ba ang layunin nitong line transect sampling? Una, ang objective nito ay upang sukatin ang distribution o population ng isang species sa isang lugar. Pangalawa, nakakatulong ito upang maikumpara natin ang bawat organism sa iba't ibang bahagi o zone ng habitat. At pangatlo, ginagamit din natin ito upang maobserbahan ang mga pagbabago sa kapaligiran, halimbawa mula sa mababaw na tubig papunta sa mas malalim na bahagi nito. Next. So, sa aquatic ecosystems, malaki ang gampanin ng line transect sampling. Natutukoy kasi nito ang tinatawag nating zonation patterns. Ang zonation patterns ay tumutukoy sa pagbabago ng uri ng species sa iba't ibang bahagi ng ecosystem. Ang pagbabagong ito ay maaaring naapektuhan ng iba't ibang environmental factors tulad ng availability ng sunlight, lalim ng tubig, nutrient concentration, oxygen levels at saka ng temperatura. Karaniwan ding ginagamit ang line transect sampling sa ecological monitoring dahil mas nabibigyan ito ng systematic at repeatable na data na mahalaga para sa mga pag-aaral sa biodiversity at kalagayan ng ecosystem. Next. Ano naman ang mga materials na kakailanganin natin para sa ating gagawing line transect sampling? Unang-una, kailangan natin ng panukat, measuring tape. Yun. Ito ang magsisilbing guide para sa mas detalyadong pagbibilang ng mga organisms. Next ay notebook or data sheet para sa pagtatala ng obserbasyon natin. Markers, flag o pegs, waterproof na lapis, camera para sa ating documentation, at kailangan din natin ng mga safety equipments tulad ng waders. So, ano nga po ba ang mga hakbang para maisagawa natin itong line transect sampling? Ang unang step ay ang site selection. Pipili tayo ng isang ligtas at accessible na aquatic site na mahalaga para malaman natin na dapat ligtas tayo at pati na rin ang mga kasama natin para mas maging madali ang ating obserbasyon at hindi na tayo magkaroon ng maraming problema. Next step ay ang gagawin na natin o isasagawa na natin ang transect line. Magme-measure muna tayo kung nasa sa atin kung gaano kahaba ang ating i-measure. Sa pagme-measure, ilalagay natin ang measuring tape dun sa shoreline papunta dun sa mas malalim na bahagi ng tubig na isang straight na line lamang. Sumunod na step ay ang pagmamarka ng equal intervals kung saan hinahati ang transect line sa magkakapantay na bahagi. Halimbawa ay 1 metro kada interval. Pagkatapos nito ay magre-record na tayo ng mga organisms sa bawat interval. Dito ay kinikilala natin at binibilang ang mga nakikita nating species ang mga organisms tulad ng mga halaman, algae, at iba pang mga hayop. So bukod sa mga organisms, mahalaga din na itala natin yung mga abiotic factors na makikita natin sa bawat interval. Tulad ng, yun nga, lalim ng tubig, amount ng light, temperature, uri ng substrate, at galaw ng tubig kung ito ba ay kalmado lamang or malakas ang agos. At ang huling step sa line transect sampling ay uulitin ito. Bakit ito inuulit? So, inuulit natin ang prosesong ito upang mas maging accurate at maging reliable at maging accurate ang mga datos na ating makakalap. So, ayun lang. So, sa kabuuan, ang line transect sampling ay isang mahalagang pamamaraan sa pag-aaral ng aquatic ecosystems dahil nagbibigay ito ng sistematikong paraan upang maunawaan natin ang distribution ng mga organisms at ang epekto ng mga environmental factors sa kanilang pamumuhay. So, para po mas ma-visualize natin kung ano po ba ang line transect sampling, may video po tayo dito sa ating PowerPoint presentation. Maikling video lang po ito. Yan, maaari niyo po itong panoorin. Maraming salamat po.
Welcome to today's video where we will be discussing deploying a transect line over coral. This is our diver Brad, and he's going to show us how to deploy a transect line. Our first step is to identify a starting point. This is typically going to be some rocky outcropping, preferably devoid of coral, or live or healthy coral. We want to secure our line to that by wrapping it around a couple times. After we have it secure, we want to find an even meter mark where we will start at. So we get to the 1 meter, we add a few extra wraps around our starting position to make sure everything is taut, and we have a place to start. Once our direction is chosen, we start swimming in that direction, just letting the transect line run itself out. This keeps the line taut. It also protects any sensitive coral life that we may encounter as we are going. You want to make sure your buoyancy is under control, and you want to swim smoothly and effortlessly. As we continue, as we get close to the full length of our transect line is going to run, we can determine that length, make sure that we have the entire measurement that we're wanting to collect. Make sure the line's straight, it's not hung up on anything. Okay. So in this case it was 12 meters. Now we find a place to secure the line to. Again, it needs to be some type of rock. We'll do a couple wraps to make sure everything stays. And then lay down the reel in a way so that it doesn't affect any of the aquatic life around it. Thanks, Brad. Now, for the actual sampling of the transect line, we start at one end. It can be either end. We give our measurement marking along the transect line, and we record all coral species that we see living within some predetermined distance of the transect line. Brad pointing out the different corals that he sees and is tallying them. If there is some question as to size or distance, you can make those determinations typically with your hand. The most common distance is 1 meter, and we'll try that. Now, for finishing up the transect line, after it's done, you'll go back, unravel at the end. Once you have the reel up, stay above the coral, and just use the tension in the reel to pull yourself back. Notice Brad is not putting any effort into swimming. He's just along for the ride and pulling himself back in. By elevating yourself, you're keeping the tape off of the coral, and you can go smoothly and slowly. You want to make sure that you keep the tape from getting tangled anywhere. Sometimes with currents, it can happen, and so you might have to fight it just a little bit, but again, you don't want to put too much effort. The more slack that develops in the line, the more likely you are to have curls and kinks. Once you get close, unwrap from the starting point, and then reel that last little bit in. Once it's all in, lock the tape mechanism so that it doesn't fall out, and secure it back to your BCD so that you're good to head back to the boat.
Very much alike with the aquatic ecosystems that were discussed previously would be our next subtopic, which is the ocean biomes. I am Antonio Paulo El Villapando, and allow me to discuss what ocean biomes are. So these biomes cover 70% of the planet's surface. There are different types of ocean biomes, and one of them, the first one, would be the coastal biomes. So what are coastal biomes? They are the area where the land and the ocean meet. So since we're talking about the meeting point of the land and ocean, wherein in the land there are the freshwater ecosystems, and in the ocean, of course, the saltwater, it is therefore a mix of the saltwater and freshwater. So since there is a convergence of the two different ecosystems, it turns out to be a unique environment that supports a wide range of life. And with that, of course, it results into the different adaptations, different characteristics and traits of the animals that live there. In addition to that, if we can remember correctly from our zoology lecture subject last semester, it can be remembered that there are like two different osmotic processes, difference between the freshwater and the marine water fishes, wherein for the freshwater, they are considered as the hyperosmotic. And since they are hyperosmotic, which means their bodies are much saltier than their environment, that means they need to gain water, and that's because they live in the freshwater. So the water around them, they gain those water, and at the same time they lose water through the urine. And with that, of course, they pee frequently, they urinate frequently, so they lose salt. So there will be a balance or an equilibrium between their body and their environment. And opposite to that would be the marine water fishes, wherein they are recognized as hypoosmotic, wherein their environment are much more saltier than their body, which requires them to like lose water and of course drink seawater, so their bodies turn more saltier, and with that they excrete the excess salt. So in return, or eventually, there would be a balance or an equilibrium again between their body and their environment. So that's just a short recall between the organisms or the fish that live both in the freshwater and the marine water. So I'm just giving you a recall since they play a major role, and is actually very evident in this topic, since like what I've mentioned earlier, the coastal biomes are a mix of the fresh and salt waters. There are different types of coastal biomes, which would be the estuaries, salt marshes, and the mangrove forests. And For the estuaries, so let us first define what estuaries are. These are the semi-enclosed bodies of water where the fresh water from the river mixes with the salt water from the ocean. So it's not just a meeting point between the two. It actually has a shape like this if you're going to search in the internet like that, since it starts from the river, which is just a narrow, straightforward line shape of the bodies of water going towards the open ocean. So, with that being said, we can conclude that they come from two different ecosystems, and when there is an overlap between the from the ecosystem from the ocean and from the river, that is what we call the ecotones. So that's just an additional information not included in the PowerPoint. So yun, ecotones, where there is an overlap between the two ecosystems, and of course it will offer a unique, highly diverse ecosystem, or a brackish environment. And one major example in the Philippines would be the Iloilo River. So it's an estuary actually. The next one would be salt marshes or coastal marshes. So they are the coastal wetlands that are flooded and drained by the tides. So we can characterize this as dense areas or vegetations. Imagine a vegetation that is being regularly flooded by the tides or brackish water. And with that, of course, in return, the vegetation would be highly salt tolerant. So the herbs, the grasses that grow there are salt tolerant since they absorb water that have high salinity. Aside from being a breeding ground for such organisms, they also serve as natural buffers. So it's also worth noting that when there's a storm, they serve as natural protection since they buffer the impacts of the storm. The next one would be mangroves. So what are mangroves? They are found in tropical and subtropical regions and are characterized by salt-tolerant trees and shrubs that grow in shallow coastal water. So when we hear the word mangroves, these are very much these are something that we are familiar with, since when we hear the word mangroves, what comes first in our mind would be the the wet coastal marshes wherein the wetlands that where mangrove trees grow, diba? We're very much familiar with that, and one major example of that here locally in the Philippines would be the Del Carmen Mangrove Reserve in Siargao. So what's special about with mangroves? So there we can relate here the lessons we had in botany last semester, which are the specialized roots that obtain air. Even if those roots are submerged underwater, they absorb oxygen, they absorb air, we call them as the pneumatophores, if you can remember. So yun, they are specialized roots for absorbing air. Aside from that is that they filter salt, and which is also a trait of the mangroves. And lastly would be that they serve as blue carbon sinks. So we often hear carbon rapidly increasing, and there is a need to like for plants to absorb them, but we are lacking plants. But what we do not know is that we have mangroves with us, and they help in absorbing immense amount of carbons. So it is a must to protect mangroves, since like I said, they store immense amount of carbons. So they are considered, that's the reason why they're considered blue carbon sinks. Of course, if we have the biomes, the ecosystems, we also have the animals that adapt and that live there. So we have yung mga seals, sea otters, dolphins, whales, ganun. Yung mga seabirds, such as the gulls, mga puffins, pelicans, as well as the reptiles or yung mga sea turtles sa dagat, the various fish, crabs, and mollusks. So, just to further elaborate, like what I've mentioned earlier regarding the osmosis between these organisms, yung mga crabs natin, it depends on the location they are at. So they can be considered as first osmoregulators if if their blood salinity is high than their surroundings. But they can also be called hypoosmotics, or yun, hypoosmotic organisms if they are found in high salinity environments. So yun, they differ. Then for the mollusks, yan, they are osmoconformers. So yun, wherein they match their internal sa environmental salinity. So yun. So do sa first three bullets, yan, yung mga bodily fluids nila have high or I have low salinity or low saline levels. So in order to survive and adapt in the environment they belong to, they conserve water. And not just that, they also rely on specialized kidneys. So those are discussed in our in the last semester by our zoology professor. So yun, this just a recall regarding but it's also a major discussion regarding the organisms that live there. Since like what I've mentioned earlier, estuaries nga or yung mga coastal biomes, ganun, it is the meeting point of the two very different ecosystem, or yun nga, yung mga freshwater and marine water. So since they are found between, so of course it will offer you can be concluded that there would be a wide range or a vast amount of trace adaptations on the animals that live there, since it depends on the niche they have, on the food na kinakain, on the roles that they play, or when they migrate from one location to another, or if nagstay lang sila. So all of those are being affected by the marine ecosystem that they live in. The next one would be the coral reefs. So I assume perhaps some of you experience or witness the beauty of coral reefs. So if you experience going on a deep diving, and you're going to like below the sea floor or in the ocean floor, you would notice that there are coral reefs staying there on the bottom part. So you might be wondering, how are they created or built, and who did actually? So they're not created by humans or anything like that, since they are natural. What made them are the calcium carbonate that are being secreted by polyp colonies. So like it states there, the polyp colonies that we're referring to are the Scleractinians, yan, the Cnidarians that we discussed at the same like what I said earlier last semester. So those colonies, they secrete these calcium carbonate skeletons, and wherein they accumulate, and over time these secretions turn into these beautiful coral reefs. So they're not just there, they serve a purpose. They support over 25% of marine life. How? Habitat of fish that reside nearby, and other organisms, tiny organisms. So who would thought that those polyp colonies, even though they are tiny, small, they actually play a big part on how this massive accumulation of calcium carbonate would turn out to be a beautiful ground for coral reefs. So yun. In addition to that, they provide vital coastal protection and tourism benefits. So like I said earlier, if you experience going on deep diving, you would witness how beautiful they are formed, especially with terms of the symmetry on how they are formed. Yun. Of course, if there is let's say a particular area in the Philippines that have these coral reefs under the sea, of course, it would attract not just us Filipinos, but also people from other countries. So who would have thought that such natural resources are just serving purpose not just for the marine life, but they also have a benefit for us humans. So in return, we should of course consequently protect them, since like it states there in the second bullet, yan, they face severe threats from climate change, pollution, and overfishing. When we say overfishing, of course, pag masyado nangingisda, especially when fishermen use dynamite or other harmful ways of course, masisira yung coral reefs, and therefore, it has detrimental effects on the coral reefs. And for the climate change and pollution, of course, diba, like global warming, increase in temperature would result in mass bleaching. And it was predicted that by 2050, we are risking losing 90% of them. And of course, we would not want that. So, what we should do is to protect and maintain them. And yun, they can be found near shores, the beach, the sea. So how? It's when when you're at the shore and you just stand there and you watch the sea waves rolling in or coming or approaching to you. That part, that point, although far away from you, it's in the middle of the sea. Below that is where the coral reefs are found. So these are just a few of many organisms or fish that live in the said or environment. One of which is the Ocellaris clownfish, the blue tang, and the seahorse. So if you'll notice, if it's familiar with you, if you watch the movie Finding Nemo or Finding Dory, these two types of fish are found there. And if you, it can be recalled that they live in the largest part of the ocean biome, right? And if you're going to remember, there is a part there where there are coral reefs on the ground. So the movie pretty much portrays real life application, since yun nga, these two fishes are found on the coral reefs. They rely on them as their habitat, and they're pretty much portrayed by the movie. So yun, as well as the seahorse. The next one would be the open ocean biomes. So they are, like what I've mentioned earlier, they are the Earth's largest marine biome. So they cover 70% of the planet's surface. So that's how massive open ocean biomes are. And at the same time, of course, they are deep, they feature less water, and supports diverse life. So since this is the largest, they encompass a wide range of life. So, and when we say wide range or different kinds of organisms, we're not just referring to different we're also referring to their size. So from tiny planktons or the phytoplanktons, like what is always mentioned in the prelim, from there to giant whales. So imagine just how massive open oceans are to support such massive amount of organisms. So for example, yung planktons, although they are tiny, they are great in amount, as well as the whales. Whales are so big to be supported by an aquatic ecosystem. What more if there are many whales? So that just shows how helpful the size of the open ocean is to support such wide range of organisms. So there is a list at the bottom part. I'm not going to be reading all of them, but try to read and analyze. What will you notice on the examples of organisms that live there? They are correct, like what I mentioned earlier. They range from smallest to biggest. So like they increase. There is a difference in their size. So yon. And as an additional information, this biome is actually affected by different factors, such as the wind and wave activity, pressure, water, temperature, and prey. So in what ways ba? So it can be recalled that before having a typhoon or experiencing a typhoon here at land, they of course form first in the middle part of the aquatic ecosystems. So dun sa open ocean na yan, there is an evaporation of water, and in the atmosphere the typhoons will form. So notice how open oceans are play roles in the formation of this. So with that being said, yun nga, like I said earlier, yung mga wave and wind activity, there are factors involved here. While there is a big amount of or number of different organisms that live there, here are just a few examples of the organisms that live there. And one of them are the tuna, the sharks, yung turtle. And like I said earlier, they have their own purposes on why they live there, on why they can adapt there. It's worth noting that yun nga, open ocean biomes are have extreme conditions, since aside from the salinity, there are factors like I've mentioned earlier, the wave and wind activity, the pressure. So all of those, they have different tolerance for that. And that's the reason why they're still able to adapt and live there up to this time, or up to this point. And they have their own roles then and niches. And yun, for the tuna, the sharks, they are highly migratory, so they move from one place to another, and that is depending on their tolerance of their surroundings. It could be based on the salinity, the predator and prey relationship between them and the other organisms, or it could be just like I said earlier, the planktons, or like what was mentioned by Ma'am DJ in the prelim, they are just drifting. So they have different purposes, they have different significance, and with that makes open ocean biomes be a breeding ground for such a vast life for different organisms that reside there.
Good day, this is Andrea Nicole V. Salvania, and I'm going to continue the discussions about the ocean biome. The fourth ocean biome is called polar sea biomes. These are located in the north and south poles, which have extremely cold, icy, and sun-deprived environments, which can support the life of polar bears, penguins, and walrus. The climate change is threatening to these areas through rising temperatures and melting ice, which are disrupting to the habitats and the food webs of the animals living in the polar sea biome. On this next slide, we can see the examples of the polar sea biomes, which are the polar bears, penguins, and walrus. Next one is the deep sea biome. These are the largest and least explored biome, which are characterized by extreme darkness, high pressure, and low temperature. This deep sea is home to a surprising amount of life, including many species that are found nowhere else in the earth. The animals belong here as the anglerfish, vampire squid, giant isopod, dambo, octopus, or ballereye. On this slide, we can see the examples of the deep sea biome, which are the anglerfish, dambo, octopus, and the ballereye fish.
Good day, everyone. My name is Sean Markel Alarena, and I will be presenting about different biomes and how they are studied using quadrant sampling. In this report, I will discuss several major biomes, including the tundra, the taiga, temperate deciduous forests, tropical rainforests, grasslands, and desert biomes. I will explain their characteristics, climate, plant, and animal adaptations, and most importantly, how scientists use quadrant sampling to study these ecosystems. By the end of the presentation, you will understand how different environments support life and how we can analyze them using simple scientific methods. So first things first, that is, in the tundra biome, the tundra biome is found in very cold regions, especially near the Arctic and on high mountains. It is known for having no trees and very low vegetation. So, to emphasize it, meaning, ang mga puno po ay hindi na grow dito, and malamig po yung environment dito, and ang harsh po ng conditions dito. So, there are different types of adaptations which I will explain later on. And the land in the tundra is mostly flat and covered with bare ground, rocks, and small plants like moss and lichens. So, wala po ditong mga big plants. Ito lang po ay mga low on vegetation, and yung soil po dito is not good for trees, so that's why it is a treeless biome. And ang freeze cycle po dito ay the ground freezes and thaws repeatedly, which makes it hard for plants to grow. So, ayun na nga po, like, sa sobrang cold po ng climate, plants barely survive in this type of biomes. And yung climate po dito is, the tundra is extremely cold. Winters can reach around negative 32 degrees, while summers are short and only slightly warm. So, long cold winters po siya and short cool summers, meaning, ayun po, mostly po talaga mas matagal po ang cold weathers. I'm gonna cite some few examples po ng type of animals na nagso-survive dito, and these are the Arctic foxes, polar bear, caribou, snowy owl, and Arctic hare. So, ayun po. Animals in the tundra survive by adapting to the cold. For example, they have thick fur or fat to stay warm, white color for camouflage, and some migrate or hibernate. So, ayun na nga po, like, usually po ang nasa Arctic po na biomes ay makikita po natin doon na ang mga white fur po sila for camouflage, either for hunting or for survival po ng prey or predator. And they have thick fur para po, ayun po, mas makada po sila doon sa cold climate. And yes, yun po. So yun. Ang ecological importance naman po nito ay, even though it looks empty, the tundra is important because it stores carbons in frozen soil and helps regulate Earth's climate. It also supports unique wildlife. So, hindi lang po natin i-conclude na masama po yung environment na ito. Of course, meron din po ditong positive traits such as, ayan na nga po, nag-store po ng carbon dun sa frozen soil. So, para ma-regulate po yung Earth's climate. So ayun po. In summary, the tundra is a cold, treeless biome with specially adapted plants and animals, and it is ideal for studying ecosystem using quadrant sampling. Now, moving on to the next biome, which is the taiga biome or the boreal forest biome. The taiga, also known as the boreal forest, is the largest terrestrial biome on Earth, covering about 17% of the land surface. So, emphasize ko lang po na this is the largest biome and usually found in the northern hemisphere. Now, if I have to explain the name of why it is called the taiga biome, so the word taiga comes from the Russian meaning land of the little sticks, while boreal comes from the Greek word meaning north wind. Both names describe its cold northern location. So, ayun po. So, ang vegetation here is, the taiga is mainly made up of coniferous trees like pine, spruce, and larch. These trees are adapted to cold weather. So, usually makikita po natin itong mga plants is the coniferous trees or mga needle-like leaves. And yung mga trees po dito usually stay green all year. So, it can also be called evergreen, and yung pag-shape po nila ay yung shapes po ng coniferous trees is nag-help po dun sa pag-fall ng snow easily when it is winter po. And ayun po, the climate here po is, the taiga has long, very cold winters and short, mild summers. Temperatures can drop to negative 50 Celsius in winter and rise to around 10 to 20 degrees Celsius in summers. So, emphasize ko lang po na very long winters and short growing seasons. So, ayun po, parang same lang po sila dun sa tundra biome, but syempre mas malamig po sa tundra since usually ice po dun, and mahaba rin po yung winter time sa taiga. And now let's talk about the animal adaptations here. So animals in the taiga survive the cold by having thick fur, large bodies to conserve heat, and wide feet to walk on snow. So ang examples po nito ay moose, gray wolf, lynx, brown bear, shuho hare. So for example po, ng snowshoe hare, ito po ay may wide feet that act like snowshoes, helping it move easily on snow. So, ayun po, yung primary adaptation po ng snowshoe hare is like, ayun po, yung meron po ng wide feet, nag-act po siya as snowshoe, so, which makes them move better on snowy environments. So, ang ecological importance po ng taiga biome is the taiga is very important because it stores large amount of carbons, helps regulate global climate, and provides habitat for many animals. So, it plays a major role po in the Earth's oxygen production and carbon cycle since, ayun nga po, madami nga po ditong coniferous trees. So, nag-store po dito ng madaming large amounts of carbons and nire-regulate po nila yung climate and provides many habitats for animals such as the birds or any type of animals that lives on trees po. And so in summary, the taiga is the largest biome dominated by coniferous forests with cold climates and specially adapted organisms, and it can be studied using quadrant sampling for smaller vegetation. Now, moving on to the next biome, which is the deciduous forest. So, the temperate deciduous forest is a biome characterized by trees that lose their leaves during fall season. So, emphasize ko lang po na dito po sa biome na ito, which yung mga leaves po nila will be green before fall, and pag ayun po, nag-hit na po yung fall season, magiging either orange, yellow, or brown yung kulay nila, and slowly po magpopol na po yung kanilang leaves. So that's why it's called the deciduous forest, meaning that the trees lose their leaves, and it is usually located in mid latitudes. So ayun po, these forests are found between the tropics and the polar regions and areas with moderate climates. And so ayun po, usually founded nga po sila ay ayun nga po, sa pinagigitnaan po sila ng polar regions and the tropics. So, the vegetation here is, these forests are also called broadleaf forests because the trees have large flat leaves. And as winter approaches, trees stop producing chlorophyll, causing the leaves to change into red, yellow, and orange before they fall. So, ayun nga po, they have broad leaves. Nag-change po yung kanilang color pag nag-winter season na or almost winter season because po, yung chlorophyll po nila or yung pag-absorb po nung yung mga pigments po ay nagdi-decrease. So, yung pagdadrop po nung mga leaves ay isa pong adaptation para po sa winter. And ang climate here is temperate deciduous forests experience 4 distinct seasons: winter, spring, summer, and fall. So, sa deciduous forest po ay full cycle po siya ng seasons, yung 4 seasons po, and this happens because the area is affected by both warm and cold air masses. So ayun nga po, since pinagigitnaan nga po siya nung polar and nung tropic, nagkakameron po siya ayun nga po, kaya nagkameron ng cycle nung 4 seasons kasi ayun, in between po siya nung 4 seasons, nung tropics and nung polar. So, ang adaptations po dito ng animals is, animals adapt to seasonal changes by hibernating, migrating, or storing food for winter. So, ang example po nito ay, white-tailed deer or black bears, red foxes, raccoons, and eastern gray squirrels. So, for example, yung squirrels po, nag-store po ng food, and yung bears po ay naghahanap po sila ng caves para mag-hibernate during the winter. And ang ginagawa po nila dito sa pag-hibernate ng bears is kumakain po silang madami hanggang makaipon na po sila ng maraming pagkain or stored fat, and they will usually stay in the cave during the full winter duration. At yung na-stored po na body fat is nagbo-burn po throughout the season. So, ayun po. And after po mag-end nung winter season, lalabas na po sila dun sa cave na kanilang pinag-estayan, and ayun po, they will start hunting once again. So, ang ecological importance po ng deciduous forest is, this biome is important because it supports high biodiversity, provides habitats for many animals, and helps regulate climate and nutrient cycling. In summary, the temperate deciduous forest is a seasonal biome with trees that shed leaves, diverse wildlife, and can be effectively studied using quadrant sampling. Now, moving on to the tropical rainforest. The tropical rainforest is one of the oldest and most diverse biomes on Earth, with some forests existing for over 60 million years. So, it has a very old ecosystem, and it has a high biodiversity, meaning it contains a lot of organisms that coexist with one another. The rainforests are areas with tall, evergreen trees and very high rainfall throughout the years. So, evergreen meaning that they retain or they stay green throughout the all season. And in this biome, there is a very high chance of rain, or there is a heavy rainfall throughout the season. And the biodiversity here is, even though rainforests cover only about 2 to 6% of Earth's surface, they are home to more than half of all plants and animal species. So this makes them one of the most complex and rich ecosystems in the world. So the tropical rainforests are usually found on every continent except Antarctica because they cannot live there. So the largest rainforests are located in the Amazon in South America and the Congo in Africa, as well as parts of Southeast Asia and Australia. And the type of animal adaptations here are animals in the rainforest adapt to warm and wet conditions by living in trees, using camouflage or bright colors, and taking advantage of many food sources. And examples includes jaguars, sloths, howler monkeys, poison dart frogs, and toucans. So, for example, yung poison dart frogs po use bright colors to warn predators, meaning that because usually when frogs emit a very colorful body color, meaning they're poisonous. So the ecological importance of rainforests they are important because they produce oxygen, store carbon, regulate climate, and support a huge number of species. They are essential for maintaining global biodiversity. So, in summary, tropical rainforests are ancient, highly diverse ecosystems with complex life forms, and quadrant sampling helps scientists study the rich biodiversity. Now, moving on to the grasslands biome. So, this type of biomes where grasses are the very dominant type of vegetation with very few trees or shrubs, meaning that they compete in nutrients, and there are usually more grasses than trees in this area. That's why it's called the grasslands. So why there are no trees is because that grasslands exist in areas where conditions do not support the growth of large trees due to factors like limited rainfall, fires, or human activities such as farming. So there are not enough waters or good water condition for trees to grow, meaning that the grass adapt with only needing small amount of nutrients to grow. And the human impact, such as the agriculture, where humans just illegal logging. And the location and types of this is, the grasslands are usually found between forests and deserts. So there are two main types: the tropical grasslands, which are near tropical regions, and temperate grasslands, which are found in cooler areas. And the difference between grasslands and savannas is mainly the number of trees present. So the natural grasslands developed during the Cenozoic era, when the earth became cooler and drier. So the animal adaptations in this biome is that animals in grasslands are adapted to open spaces by running past, grazing on grasses, and living in groups for protection. So, for example, including the bison, prairie dogs, lions, zebras, and cheetahs, and such as the cheetahs are fast runners, while zebras lives in herd to avoid predators. And the grasslands are important because they support grazing animals, maintain soil health, and are widely used for agriculture. They play a key role in food production and ecosystems. So, in summary, grasslands are open ecosystems dominated by grasses with specially adapted animals, and they are ideal for studying using quadrant sampling. So, compared to forests, grasslands are easier to study because of their open space and simple vegetation structure. Now moving on to the last biome, which is the desert biome. So a desert biome is characterized by extremely low rainfall to very dry conditions, and meaning that there is very little water in this environment or biome. So deserts have very low humidity, meaning there is almost no water vapor in the air, and sometimes when it rains, the rain evaporates before it even reaches the ground. So when it does rain though, it can come as a sudden cloudburst, delivering a large amount of rain in a short time. Although it doesn't really last that long because of the dry conditions. And because there are very few clouds, the sun's heat directly reaches the ground, making deserts extremely hot during the days. This intense heat can create mirages where objects appear distorted due to the rising hot air. And the animal adaptations here are that animals in the desert survive by conserving water, avoiding heat during the day, and becoming active at night. And examples include camels, fennec foxes, kangaroo rats, and rattlesnakes and scorpions. So, for example, kangaroo rats can survive without drinking water, while many animals are nocturnal to avoid heat. And so, deserts are very important because they support specially adapted organisms and help scientists understand survival in extreme environments. They also play a role in Earth's climate and weather patterns. So, in summary, deserts are dry, extreme environments with specially adapted organisms, and quadrant sampling helps scientists study their limited but unique vegetation. So, compared to other biomes, deserts have the least vegetation, making them one of the most challenging ecosystems to study.
I'm Vincent Derama, and I will be reporting the quadrat sampling of terrestrial biomes. So first, what is quadrat sampling? So quadrat sampling is a fundamental method in ecological and geographical research used to study the distribution and abundance of organisms or features within a defined area. So usually it is made of a square or rectangular frame. A quadrat is intended to mark off a certain region for data collecting and observation. So, paano nga ba ginagawa ang quadrat sampling? So, ang first step nito is to define a study area kung saan mismo i-conduct yung study na gagawin ninyo. Second, select quadrat size and type since may iba't ibang types for specific studies. Then third, collect data within the quadrats. Then fourth, analyze data. Fifth, interpret results. And last, draw conclusions and make recommendations. So there are multiple types of quadrat sampling, but here are some of the most commonly used pagdating sa terrestrial biomes. So una is yung fixed quadrat. Quadrats with permanent markings that are used to track changes over time in the same area. So ito yung type na ginagamit if yung study is for long term since permanent nga yung markings niya. So pang matagalan talaga yung quadrat type na to. Then second, random quadrat, where quadrats are placed randomly to avoid bias and to ensure representativeness. So sa random quadrat, na-ensure ninyo na walang bias yung study ninyo since completely random nga yung inaaral ninyong data na makukuha. Then sa systematic quadrat, which is yung third, where quadrats are arranged in a predetermined arrangement or at regular intervals to systematically cover the study area. So ito naman is ginagamit if mas gusto ninyong makover yung area ng mas maayos while still maintaining some sort of being less biased dun sa area. So for the application, researchers broadly use quadrat sampling in plant studies. So most commonly used ang quadrat sampling pagdating sa plant studies since siya ay slow-moving taxa. And ang quadrat sampling is mostly used pagka ang sinastudy ay slow-moving or non-moving na taxa since ang kinocover nga lang niya ay small area. And ecologists apply it in biodiversity research. Some scientists use it to determine taxonomic richness of slow-moving taxa in a specific area. Like what I've said kanina, ginagamit siya mostly ay pag sa slow-moving taxa lang since maliit lang yung area na nakakover niya. It serves as the best method for measuring taxonomic richness in coastal areas. So maganda siyang method since siya ay mura lang and madaling i-set up. Hindi tulad ng iba pang methods where kailangan ng napakaraming equipments and mahal. Experts also use it to evaluate the impact of weathering, erosion, or trampling in an ecosystem. Moving on sa advantages and disadvantages. So first, sa advantages, it is easy to use and inexpensive since konti lang yung materials na kailangan, hindi tulad ng ibang sampling na mahal. Then it's suitable for studying slow-moving organisms and plants and sometimes fast-moving animals if maswerte yung researchers na may mapapadaan dun sa sample na kanilang pinag-set-upan. Then, it requires researchers to work in the field and without care. Ibig sabihin, pwede mo lang siyang i-observe without doing much. Now, moving on sa disadvantages. It is very biased towards slow-moving taxa since hindi naman nagagalaw yung sample kung saan nakalagay yung quadrat. And then it can only collect data present at the time of observation and not buried too deep in the sediment. By not buried too deep in the sediment, ibig sabihin nito yung nasa ibabaw lang na organisms ang madaling makita. May organisms pa sa ilalim na hindi masyadong na-observe. It is low estimate of taxonomic richness and it may not represent the entire area adequately due to the small area of observation. Yun din yung isa niya sa mga limitations since yung area ng observation niya ay maliit lang, hindi maaaring ma-represent as a whole and nang maganda yung buong environment or area na pinag-aaralan ninyo. So here is a mathematical representation of quadrat sampling. So the density of a population within a quadrat can be represented mathematically as density equals number of individuals over area of quadrat. So dito sa isang example, if a quadrat with an area of 100 meters squared contains 50 individuals, the density would be 50 over 100 since 50 yung number ng individuals and yung 100 is yung meters squared na area. So, ang magiging sagot niya is 0.5 individuals per meter squared. So, that's one way to interpret the data na makukuha nyo sa quadrat sampling.
So, good day everyone. I am Jester Lim again, and I will be presenting a journal study related to our topic, which is the climate and biomes. The title of the study is The Impact of Climate Change on Basin Vegetation based on Biome BGC Model, a case study with the Jialing River Basin by Wu Chuan-Sen et al. It is published this February 2026. So this study is closely related to our topic, climate and biomes, because it focuses on how climate change affect vegetation, which is a major component of any biomes. Since biomes are defined by the climate, a dominant plant life, any change in temperature or precipitation can directly influence their structure and functions. For the synopsis of our study, the study uses the Biome BGC model to analyze how climate changes impacts vegetation in Jialing River Basin. It mainly uses the Leaf Area Index or LIA to measure the vegetation health and growth. The LIA is a measurement tool used to determine how dense the vegetation is by comparing the total leaf area to the ground area. It is important because it reflects plant health and growth, which are influenced by climate change conditions. So the researchers use historical climate and vegetation data to simulate future conditions. The results show that the temperature and precipitations are expected to increase in the future. Despite these changes, vegetation in the area has remained relatively stable over time. Woodland areas showed higher and more stable vegetation growth compared to grassland areas. However, the study also found that climate change can cause short-term stress such as water shortage due to warming before long-term improvements in vegetation growth can occur. So, let's proceed sa objectives ng study nila. So, the objective of the study is to examine how climate change influences vegetation dynamics using the Biome BGC models. It aims to simulate the growth of woodland and grassland ecosystems, to use LIA as an indicator of vegetation conditions, to evaluate vegetation responses under different climate scenarios, to provide data that can support ecosystem management and planning. So what is the relation of this study to climate and biomes? So this study is important to our topic because it shows that climate factors like temperature and precipitation directly affect vegetation patterns, which in turn shape biomes. When vegetation changes, it affects three aspects: the biodiversity, the carbon storage, and the water cycles. These are all essential components of our biomes. Therefore, changes in climate can lead to shift or transformations over time. So what is our conclusion for this study? So in our conclusion, the study demonstrated that the climate change plays a significant role in shaping vegetation and ultimately the entire biomes. Understanding these changes is important for predicting future environmental conditions and for developing strategies to protect our ecosystem. Thank you.